Welcome to another episode of Bourbon Bay Talks. Today we have a special guest with us today, Mark from Bourbon Life Podcast on Spotify. Join us as we talk about the history of the industry, its present and future, as well as many other topics. I'd like to thank my presenting sponsors, Higher Order Smokers and Loaded Cannon Distillery. Enjoy another edition of Gambler Bay Speakeasy. Good morning, Bourbon Bay. This is Steven, your host with Bourbon Bay Talks, along with a very special guest, Mark from Bourbon Life, which is one of the most popular podcasts about bourbon. And I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself. And how are you doing today, Mark?
Man, I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. Thanks for the great introduction, too. I don't know that we're one of the most popular, but, we're thrilled to be doing what we do. It's a lot of fun. Been doing it now, podcasting now since February of last year. So going on, gosh, man, it'll almost be 2 years in February. Yeah. So pretty excited about that. But yeah, my name's Mark Rucker. I'm an attorney from Lexington, Kentucky. I've been practicing law for a lot longer than I care to admit, because that lets everybody know really how old I am. But about 3 years ago, 3 years ago this month, actually, I was just, practicing law is just a very boring thing, Steve. I don't know, if you know any attorneys or friends with them, but it's not the glamorous life. Okay. Yeah. So it's not as glamorous as they always, depict on TV or in the movies or whatever. So it's pretty boring, but I've lived in Kentucky my whole life, and bourbon is something that I just kind of grew up around. But I love photography. I'm kind of a hobbyist, an amateur hobbyist at it. So I love doing pictures and I love bourbon. So my wife suggested back in December of 2018. She said, well, why don't you just do like an Instagram site? Well, I didn't know anything about Instagram. I love social media. I love Facebook, and I was on Twitter a lot, but I hadn't done anything really with Instagram. So I looked at it, decided to start the Bourbon Life, and just started uploading pictures of my bourbon, which at the time I really didn't have a whole lot because I really wasn't into it as the way I am now. But it just kind of grew from there. And then last year, my good friend Matt and I talked about it, and we decided to start the podcast. And, here we are, man. I guess tonight we're going to record episode 96, I think it is.
Oh, wow.
So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that is. I know I've been listening to your show for this year, and you guys were kind of the ones that helped inspire me to start my own little podcast.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, and just basically listening to some of the amazing guests. You've had people on from Harlan Wheatley from Buffalo Trace, and then Digger McFarland recently that you did with Moonshiners. So, it's just, and then also the, can't remember his name right now, but the gentleman from the Pappygate heist. So,
Oh yeah, Toby Kurtzinger, Toby and his wife Julie. Yeah.
And
I'm very fortunate. It's funny because I started with the Instagram, like I said, and really grew that. We're over 50,000 followers now, so that's really helped me be able, when I go out to try to book people to be on the show, they always ask, well, what's your demographics? What reach do you have? How many listeners do you have? And, when we first started, obviously we didn't have a lot of listeners, but I was always able to say, yeah, but I've got 45,000 followers on Instagram, and that usually seemed to help seal the deal. So, the guys like Connor O'Driscoll at Heaven Hill and Harlan Wheatley at Buffalo Trace, Chris Morris from Woodford Reserve, those guys, Jackie Zykin with Old Forester, when you try to get those bigger name people, they want to know that they're going to be some draw to it. They're going to get some, it's going to be out there for a lot of people to see and hear. So we always promote the show on Instagram. So I've been really lucky in terms of, it's been a lot of hard work. I shouldn't say it's just luck, but because the Instagram site was already there, it's really helped the podcast be able to get the guests that we've been able to get. Man, we've had some really good ones, but it's not just about the big guys. We've had a lot of the big guys on there, but we also like to have a lot of these smaller craft distilleries. There's a lot of great things going on around the world, around the country, in terms of bourbon production and rye production. So, guys from Texas, Nevada, New York, Michigan, we've had them from everywhere, regardless of size, man. So it's been a lot of fun.
No, yeah, and it seems like with you and Matt, you just have this great camaraderie, and, you being on your side, and then, from what I remember, Matt has a culinary background, and so you guys kind of really just are able to, you know, make a really awesome show, like with when you guys do your tasting part of it with the products. And so, I mean, like,
Yeah, well,
how'd
thanks,
you
man.
guys kind of like really develop that relationship?
You know, it's funny. We were actually at Liquor Barn here in Lexington. It's a section of town called Hamburg, and I actually live in the Hamburg area of Lexington. But there's a big Liquor Barn store here, and I've been a loyal fan and patron of Liquor Barn for the last 30 years or more. And it's just, you know, so happens that the store is about a mile and a half from my house now, which is really nice. But back before COVID, you know, they always did the releases, and they were having a Pappy release, and this was probably. I guess it was 2019, the late fall of 2019. And I was up there with a buddy, and we're standing outside. They did wristbands, and then they just draw the numbers. So if it matches your wristband, then you get the chance to buy. And Matt just happened to be standing next to me. So I was talking to my buddy that I was with. And I know I don't look like it, but I actually did an Ironman back in 2013. So my friend was talking to me about he said something. He said, well, you're the Iron Man. Well, Matt was standing right beside me, and he looked at me. He's like, wait a second, you're an Iron Man? And I was like, yeah. So he's like, well, I'm training for an Iron Man right now. So we just kind of started talking, you know, because of Bourbon, we were there, but then we connected over the Iron Man story. And this Liquor Barn just happens to have like a tasting bar inside, and they've got like 20 beers on tap. They've got a full service deli, so you can get sandwiches and whatnot. So I'd go up there in the evenings after work, sit around and have a drink or so. And, you know, I just saw Matt in there a couple of weeks later, and I was like, hey man, weren't you the guy that was doing the Iron Man? And we just started hanging out and talking. So every once in a while, we just run into each other up there. We started talking about bourbon and introduced, you know, Matt was much more into it at that point than I was. So he really introduced me to a lot of great bourbons, and with his culinary, his, you know, cooking background, and also working in a bakery, he's got a tremendous palate. So that's a huge plus on the show. You know, I try to feel like I steer the bus, you know. I kind of keep the show on track for the most part until I start drinking too much. But Matt's the guy with the palate, you know, so he can pick out notes. And it's amazing how many of our guests during the show will just, you know, they'll just stop and be like, Matt, that's awesome. I mean, I'm writing down your tasting notes so I can, you know, so I can use these. And it's really amazing what he's been able to do and how he does it. But yeah, you know, he's about 15 years younger than me, so it's kind of funny. But we get along great, and you know, we've kind of bonded over bourbon, and we love what we do.
No, I mean, and I just love that chemistry that you guys have, and plus, I think it just kind of brings the story more to life. And I mean, like you guys were saying, is that, you know, whiskey can really help, or bourbons, can really help bring people together. And I mean, also one great thing about it too is just the history of how it's helped to create our country. And I know you guys have talked a lot about that with some of the distilleries, and then also just other topics when you've talked to other people on the show. And I mean, so like, where's your thought processes on like kind of that up and coming? Because I mean, basically bourbon's just had a resurgence in the last, you know, 5-6 years on things.
Sure. Yeah, you know, and it's funny because I don't see that it's going anywhere. We had a guest on a couple shows ago. His name is Paul Packelt, and Paul is an author, but he also created the Ultimate Spirits Challenge. So you might be familiar with that. Yeah. Your listeners may have heard of that. If not, you know, check it out. But Paul just put out a new book. It's called Buffalo Bourbon and Barrels.
Yeah, I got that book.
Buffalo Barrels and Bourbon. Okay. Yeah, so Paul's a great author. It's a great book, but it traces the history of Buffalo Trace Distillery. And he goes back to talking about when Buffalo roamed.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of funny. If you're not a history buff, you know, you might be a little at the beginning like, ooh, what's that about? But then he gets into the history, and he talks about all the guys, E.H. Taylor. He talks about, you know, Blanton. And I mean, it's a really cool book. And but we asked Paul, you know, like, and Paul's been a spirits critic for 40 years. He's America's premier critic in the spirits industry. He doesn't just do bourbon, but he does all the spirits. And he's like, man, you know, it's not going anywhere. This is not a bubble. He's like, this is just a resurgence. It's a growth, but it's not a bubble. He's like, these distilleries are spending multiple millions, and even Buffalo Trace, their expansion is I think it's $1 billion expansion. So, you know, they're planning 20 to 25 years down the road, and they're increasing their production to meet what they anticipate the demand's going to be at that point in time. Plus, they're building new facilities, new experiences. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy what's happened, but it's just going to continue. I feel bad. Some of the smaller distilleries over the last year and a half because of COVID, they've not been able to have guests come to their distilleries. They've not been able to do tours. That's had a pretty big impact on them. Some of them though have really jumped onto that, like Starlight Distillery. We just had they're on this week. James Wood, he's their brand and sales manager. And when COVID first hit, man, he jumped on social media and they started doing barrel picks and they were promoting that. And Starlight Distillery has just taken off, and they're putting out some great product. I'm trying to think. They're a winery and orchard, but they've been in business as an orchard for about 180 years.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy how long they've been in business. They've only been distilling for about maybe 20, something like that. So, but it's crazy what they've been able to do. So, but there's other distilleries, unfortunately, that haven't been that successful in dealing with the whole COVID thing. So I think we're going to see maybe some of these smaller craft distilleries possibly shut down, unfortunately. But the big ones are going to be around. They're planning for 20, 25 years down the road. They're spending millions of dollars. They don't plan on going anywhere. And overall, I see that industry just continuing to grow, which is, it's good news. It's also bad news if you're a fan, because it makes bottles harder to find for those of us that want to find them. The allocated stuff, the Buffalo Trace stuff, the Weller, the E.H. Taylor, all that stuff, the Eagle Rare, Blanton's, whatever. It's harder and harder to find. But these other craft distilleries are popping up, and they're putting out some delicious bourbons and rye. So if you give them a chance, you'll find that some of those will actually fill these gaps. And it's really some pretty unique stuff that's coming out.
Well, yeah, kind of going along with the Starlight. I mean, I remember listening to it, and that they had talked about how they, you weren't actually able in Indiana to distill products for a while, but I guess along with their owner and some of the other distillers in Indiana, they kind of helped to change that. And it does seem to be where a lot of like craft distillers, like you mentioned, along with their associations, are kind of going to their state governments and trying to change the laws to kind of help things out.
Yeah, they really are, and Starlight started out, I want to say it was right around 2000 that they started out, they got the law changed to where they could distill, they could do brandy. So they could do fruit-based. They couldn't do mash bill with grains, but they could do fruit-based liquors. So they started doing brandy. And then I think it was 2015, 2013, 2015, they changed to where they could actually do distilling with grains. So yeah, they've really not been putting out their own stuff. Well, they never sourced anything.
Yeah.
They've always done their own. But yeah, so it's like 6 years. But there's another group over there, Spirits of French Lick. That show is actually coming out Friday. Alan Bishop, he's their head distiller over there. Great guy. We've had him on the show before, but Alan's doing some great stuff there in southern Indiana, just across the border from Louisville, about 20 minutes away. Just, crazy stuff, man. He's doing some amazing stuff. So there's a lot of great bourbon and stuff coming from bourbon and rye coming from different states. It's not just Kentucky as much as, so I was talking about Alan, Alan over there, and just doing some great stuff. And there's a lot of distilleries that are out there across the country now that are putting out some really, really great products, and there's a lot of history that goes to it as well. That some of these people like Frey Ranch, we did a barrel pick with them last night on Zoom, which was a lot of fun. That'll be coming out probably in March of next year. It'll be our first true barrel pick that we've done. We're really excited about that. But Frey Ranch, they're like fifth generation farmers. They've had a farm out there in Nevada since 1860 or 70. And Colby Frey, who's the owner now, he and his wife Ashley, Colby decided about 15 years ago that he wanted to distill. So he taught himself, and man, they're putting out some amazing bourbon and amazing rye. So it's really fun to do the show and get to meet these people and to get some exposure to other things. Even though, like I said, as much as I like to say Kentucky is the only state that can produce bourbon, that's obviously not true.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Like even down here in Florida, the craft spirit industry has just been growing. I think, back in 2010 or there was probably about just 30 or so. And now here we are in 2020 and there's close to like 80 distilleries.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you kind of feel like part of that is just like, I mean, now people know what they like and they know what they like to taste, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that people are learning about the history, or they're, because, of COVID, now they want that quality, that craft spirit a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of carryover. Because the brewing industry kind of went through this over the last 10 years or so. These craft breweries started popping up everywhere, and there were several that led the charge against, not against. I shouldn't say that they were against the major breweries, but they just created something different for their people, for their fans and their followers. So they created these small, these cult followings, and they've grown. But then craft breweries just took off. So I think we're seeing the kind of that same pattern with with distilleries, where you've got people that want something unique, something different. Not everybody wants to pick up a bottle of Heaven Hill. So I shouldn't just say Heaven Hill, but something from a large distillery. So it gives a lot of good options with these smaller craft distilleries. And I like I said, I don't think a lot of them are going to go anywhere. Some of them, unfortunately, because of COVID, excuse me, they've really had a hard time with it. But hopefully in the next 6 months, we'll be past all that, and these guys will continue to do their thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's probably starting to help is, I mean, when I went up to Kentucky back in March of this past year, I noticed like places like Bardstown, Kentucky, or the Bourbon Company, where they're kind of starting to do that Napification, as it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and there's some places that even down here, like a company called Old St. Pete Distillery, they're kind of doing that Napification. And I think, I mean, what is your thoughts? Like, you think that's going to kind of maybe help some of these smaller craft distilleries kind of keep up a little bit with the big guys? Or
yeah, I think so. I think when you have these, when you have these destination locations, Kentucky, we're pretty fortunate because there are so many distilleries, so smaller distilleries can pop up. And when people come to Kentucky, a lot of people want to go to these larger distilleries and check them out, but these craft distilleries are pulling people in as well. And at Bardstown Bourbon, I don't want to say they're a craft distillery, because they're now one of the largest distillers of bourbon in the world. But man, they just came out of nowhere, 5-6 years ago. And they've just taken it by storm, and they're doing a contract distilling for a ton of different brands. Yeah. And anytime you drive by there, because I'm about an hour from Bardstown, there's at least one or two new rick houses, and we're talking like 35,000 to 50,000 barrel rick houses going up every week. I mean, it's crazy. They've got their own bottling plant down there now, so they can distill, they can rick house, the barrels, and they can bottle for all of these different brands. And they're killing it. But yes, it is a destination. They've got a wonderful restaurant. They got great facility. They've got a really cool bar. It's called Pete's Place, and Pete was the original one of the founders. It was his idea. He unfortunately passed away about 2 years ago. But the legacy lives on, and they're carrying the torch and doing some great stuff. But like Kentucky Owl, they got bought out by Stoli, and they are getting ready. They just broke ground. I think it's a 450 or 460 acre facility down in Bardstown that they're going to build. It's going to be like Disney World for bourbon people. So it is becoming a destination thing. They're like Napa. People, we go out to the wineries and let's stay for a week, and they'll tour different wineries, and there's all these different things they can do. So now people are starting really to head to Kentucky and stay, in Louisville or Lexington. Either way, you're about an hour from Bardstown, but you've got distilleries in Lexington, you've got distilleries in Northern Kentucky, you've got them scattered throughout Central Kentucky between Lexington and Louisville. And then you got them down in Bardstown as well, of course. So, it's really cool that people can come here and stay for a week or two, and hit a ton of places, not just the big people, but a lot of these smaller distilleries that are starting to be very successful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's an industry like we talked about that's growing, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. Like I have some friends who, they own a distillery. It's like Horse Soldier Bourbon. And they have a restaurant down here in St. Pete called Urban Still House, which, I mean, that's just their restaurant, and they do have a still in there. But I know they have plans to build a large distillery up in Somerset and Kentucky.
I think they just broke ground. A week or two ago. Yeah, it's going to be a huge facility down there by Lake Cumberland in Somerset, Pulaski County. I'm really excited to get down there and check that out, man.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just a great story in that sense too. And it's like, I mean, it seems like more states are starting to kind of show that, Kentucky, it's a great whiskey, have, a huge amount of history in it. But there's other states that are kind of just starting to pick up, like Texas, Colorado.
Right.
I mean, even Florida, I think, is starting to kind of enter into that game a little bit too. So, I mean, are there other like places that you kind of like looking at to be like maybe the next up and coming or?
I mean, Texas is everything that's coming out of Texas right now has pretty much impressed me. Anything that we've had from down there, there's some great groups that are operating down there right now, and anything that we've had that I've ever had coming out of Texas it's just been amazing. And the thing is that with their heat cycle and their humidity and things, they can really cycle a bourbon in 3 years, 4 years, and it really comes out and tastes more like a 6 to 8 year old Kentucky bourbon. So their aging cycle has shortened. They lose a lot of whiskey to the angel share just because of the heat down there. But Texas is probably the state that has impressed me the most. Nevada has got some really good stuff. Frey Ranch is out of there. I guess I mean I can throw in Smoke Wagon, even though they're not distilling their own stuff. Aaron Chepanek, the co-owner, he's a master blender and he buys his stuff from MGP and blends it up. But doing some great stuff. But there's another place out there called Bentley Heritage, and they should be releasing their stuff. We had their guy on the show, Johnny Jeffries, a couple last year, and their stuff should be ready for release. We got to taste some of it, and it's really good. So I think there's some good stuff going on there. New York is putting out some really good stuff as well. Widow Jane up there, we had Lisa Roper Wicker on our show. She's the master distiller for them. She has worked in several different places and probably one of the biggest unknown master distillers out there. I mean, that name just people don't, when you hear Lisa Wicker, people don't go, oh yeah, she's awesome. But they should. I mean, they really should, because what she's doing with Widow Jane and what she's done in the past at other places, it's been pretty amazing. So, but yeah, there's some good stuff, coming out of different locations out of, New York. But Texas, I would say right now is probably my second behind Kentucky. I mean, Texas is probably my second favorite producing state right now.
Yeah. I mean, and like you were saying earlier with, women are really starting to make a big impact. I mean, granted, they've been, distilling for, centuries, back to like Mesopotamian times, like that book, Whiskey Women, that came out, which is a great book.
Yeah.
And I mean, but now you're starting to see more like Marion Aves, Heather Green, and like you said, the master distiller from New York. I think you see more of that kind of coming along. And
oh yeah, I definitely do. It's funny because Kentucky obviously traditionally had dominated the market, and in terms of the bourbon world, and it's always been a man's world. I mean, through the 80s, the 80s were a really difficult time, obviously, for bourbon into the 90s. But, up until that point in time, it was almost all men who had been doing things. But, now that's not to say women weren't involved, because obviously you can look at Margie Samuels. If it weren't for her, Maker's Mark would not be what Maker's Mark is. Simply, the bottle design, the name, the
wax,
red wax, I mean, that's the thing, you look at that, and there are billboards here, in Kentucky, and it just has red wax on the top, and it doesn't have to say Maker's Mark, that it's Maker's Mark, so iconic, figures like that, Margie Samuels for sure. And like Nelson's Greenbrier, they've got a great history of their distillery. And it's a lot of fun, because the wife of Charles Nelson, the founder, when he died, she actually continued running the distillery by herself. So there were women in the business. They just didn't get the recognition that they deserved. And now, that's starting to come to light more. But modern day, there are so many women that are out there doing some just amazing things. Mary Ann, like you said, she was a Castle and Key. And now she's moved on. She's doing her own thing, and she's working with different brands and blending for them. And she's just doing some great stuff. Jackie Zykan with Old Forester. Jackie's like a rock star in the bourbon world. And I love following her on Instagram, but she's amazing. Peggy Noe Stevens, she was the first female master taster ever. And she does a lot of stuff. Well, she does design. She helps people create new brands. She also has written several books, cookbooks, recipe books, things like that. Witchfork, I think I'm trying to remember what the name of the new book is. Like, which fork do I use with my bourbon or something? But Peggy No Stevens is another one that has been around and is now really getting the recognition that she deserves. Not a distiller, but first master taster. Alex Castle down at Old Dominic. She's doing some amazing stuff. She's a UK grad as well, so go Kentucky, go Cats. But she's down there at Old Dominic, and she's really doing some great stuff. I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of women out there in the place in the industry now that are doing some great stuff, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I mean, this industry is really starting to grow, and especially, I mean, when things are just getting a lot harder to get, I mean, things that are made here in the country, you know, I think those are what people are starting to go after, like we talked about earlier, especially like with the craft industry and things like that. I think it's just really starting to grow, and hopefully, you know, it'll just continue to keep going. So, but I mean, kind of going a little bit different in that, you know, like now you're starting to see also a lot of celebrities get into it. I mean, I know like recently you guys had the master blender from Blacken was on,
Yeah,
or
right.
yeah, and then so like, what is your thoughts about having a lot of these celebrities kind of join on? I know like recently Mike Rowe just came out with his own Tennessee whiskey, a Nobel, and then of course you got John Rich with American Red Deck Riviera. So
Right, right. I mean, you know, some of these guys are pretty actively involved, it seems like, in what they're doing. Some of them it's just, you know, hey, this is, you know, something I'm going to slap my name on, and we're going to try to sell it because my name is on it. You know, Bradshaw Bourbon is one that comes to mind. But Terry seems to have been involved in the process, you know, and they're distilled by Green River Distilling, which used to be the old O.Z. Tyler down in Owensboro. But they've rebranded. Now they're called Green River Distilling, but they're doing some really good stuff down there. And the bourbon I've not cracked his rye yet. I do have a bottle of it, but the bourbons, the two different batches of bourbons that I've had have actually been really good. And I know Terry does a lot of promotional work for the brand and goes out and speaks and does a lot of things to promote the brand. And it seems like he was active in terms of, you know, distilling and deciding to go with Green River and what he wanted to do. But yeah, you know, we had Rob, and I'm just drawing a blank on his last name with Blackened, but you know, that's Metallica's whiskey. And I think there's some people that just look at that and they go, oh yeah, it's a gimmick, it's whatever. But you know, I mean, if you taste it, it's good stuff. And Rob was actually out from Stranahan's out in Colorado, and he was their master distiller out there for years and did a great job. And then once Dave passed away, Dave Pickerel, who was actually originally working with Metallica on the Blackened brand, when he passed away, they went to. Man, I feel terrible because I think I had too much to drink last night for that barrel pick. Man, I just keep,
it's all good.
I just keep drawing.
Totally understand.
Like,
totally understand.
Last names, and I'm like, what was his last name? What was his last name? But you know, yeah. So there are brands that I think, you know. Now, does Metallica actually get that involved with it? I don't think that Metallica does. Rob Dietrich, that's his name. I'm sorry, I knew it was Rob. I couldn't remember the last name, but you know, I don't think Metallica. I think they worked with Dave and told Dave what they wanted, and Dave Pickerel was really working to help them create that. And Rob is carrying that over. So they are somewhat active in it, but they're not, you know, it's not like they're going out and picking the mash bill and creating it and doing the distilling themselves or anything like that. But it's great. It's great whiskey. I mean, I was really surprised. I'd never had it until we did the show with Rob. So I was really, really pleased with that. But we're actually recording a show tonight with Paul Wesley and Ian Sommerhalder. I don't know if you know them, but it's Brothers Bond Bourbon. Yeah, so it's Brothers Bond.
I think
Bourbon.
Leslie, I've heard of his name.
They've been on all these different TV shows and Vampire Diaries, you know. So, yeah, so it's another celebrity brand.
Oh, yeah.
But and I've not opened the bourbon. I've got the bottle, but I've not cracked it, so I don't know how it tastes. But they seem like, from what I've heard, they seem like they were pretty active in the whole process. So, you know, hopefully going to learn more about that tonight, talking with them. So, yeah, I mean, some of it I know it's just people saying, "Here's my name, let's sell some bourbon." But I think there are other people out there that are legit, like saying, I really want a bourbon brand. I want to be involved in the process, and I really want to make something positive happen out of it. So pretty neat.
No, yeah, you're right. I mean, and going back to the Brothers Bond, I mean, we sell that where I work, and I mean, I haven't heard a whole lot about it other than I mean, I hear it's a pretty good bourbon and up there. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of interesting how more and more celebrities are kind of getting into doing distilled spirits, not just bourbons, but I mean, you get, quite a few different spirits out there. But now kind of like getting into probably our last little question we'll ask. I mean, kind of doing like what you and I are doing. Do you see like, I mean, there are a couple of those podcasts out there from YouTube, Spotify, and you kind of see like that's kind of helping to keep the industry, like getting people to figure out like, oh, hey, because like I know there's some brands that I've listened to you guys talk about and then I haven't heard about yet. So I guess the question is just like, so do you see that what you and I are doing is kind of helping to spark the interest back so. Even more and to kind of keep it going?
Brands will tell us that, and they'll thank us on the show, which is really cool. When you get somebody that, they're making some great product that you really enjoy drinking, and then they'll just stop and say, hey, thank you for what you guys do. We appreciate your passion, and you're helping us spread the word in areas where we might not necessarily be able to, get the reach that we would like to have. So it's really cool for me to be able to know that I'm playing a small part in doing it. But like I said, I grew up in Kentucky, passionate about bourbon. And it's just something for me that I can share that passion with as many people as I can, as many people that will listen to Matt and myself, go on and on, but we enjoy doing it and we love doing it. We love being able to help brands out. Now, the bigger brands, I think they appreciate what we do. Do they need us? Probably not. But the smaller brands, these craft distilleries, I think they truly appreciate what guys like us and, what we're doing. And giving the exposure that they might not otherwise get.
No, yeah. I mean, I definitely since I've only started like 6 months ago, I've been doing a lot of the local distilleries. So I go around to places here in Tampa, like some of my friends at Gambler Bay Distillery, which is a small craft distillery, Old St. Pete, and also Loaded Cannon Distillery, which is just to name a couple. And, they, like you said, they like that I'm helping to kind of get their story out there. And I mean, and I think that's what really attracts people is that's, when they find out about these stories of these brands, like our Gambler Bay Distillery with Mark Pond, and he's actually using an old family recipe from his grandfather, who they're originally from Poland and they moved over to Canada during Prohibition, and they became huge distillers. And
right.
At that time, of course, legal or illegal distillers. And it's actually their family kind of got a very, very well known to the authorities in Canada, to actually just as recent as when his parents got married. They were still up in Canada, and the Canadian Mounties sent 12 police to their house because they're like, if there's this many pawns getting together, there's got to probably be some illicit booze in there.
I mean, sharing that story with your listeners and your viewers, that's a story that a lot of people would never hear, So I think we're providing a good service to these, especially the smaller guys that otherwise wouldn't have their story heard by a lot of people. So I say, keep doing it, man. I love it. Like I said, I'm an attorney. It's a boring job, but man, doing this is like, it's kind of cool when you can sit down at the end of the day and say, yeah, I just set it down, even though we do it remotely most of the time, but to say, yeah, I just spent an hour and a half with Harlan Wheatley drinking bourbon. I mean, or Eddie Russell from Wild Turkey. I mean, it's awesome. Or Fred No from Jim Beam. I mean, it's just really amazing to be able to sit and drink their bourbon with them and ask them questions about it, man. It's the bourbon life, and I love living it.
Well, I hope to one day get to be able to do that and talk to some of those guys, and because I'm sure they got. I mean, I've heard some of the stories that they tell you on your show and love it, and But yeah, I guess just one last question is like, so any advice
Yeah,
for
man.
an up
Just
and coming podcaster that you'd like to share,
find your
or
niche.
anybody who's kind of
Do what you love to do, man. If you're passionate about it, just keep doing it. Keep knocking on doors, keep sending emails. And I mean, that's what I did when we started, just emailing people and asking, hey, would you be on the show? We'd love to have you on the show. And grow your brand, and, be thankful for your followers, and, reward them as you can, be as thankful as you can. Do whatever you can to show them how much you appreciate them, because, if you don't have any listeners, you're not going to have a show much longer, So Matt and I
yeah.
are very appreciative of all the people that listen to our show, and all of our Instagram followers and Facebook followers as well, man. So we're very fortunate to have what we have. It's been a lot of hard work. There's been some luck, I think, involved with it as well, probably. Timing, I think, was pretty fortunate for us as well. But yeah, man, just keep doing what you're doing, and be passionate. Continue to be passionate about it. When it becomes a job, that's when it's time for you to think about hanging it up. But as long as it's fun, then I say by all means keep doing it and keep having fun with it.
Well, definitely appreciate it, Mark. And again, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time and joining me on my show, and, chatting some bourbon history. And yeah, so I just like to take this time and thank everybody. And if you guys have any comments about today's show, please put them down and I'll definitely be putting putting a link into the description for Bourbon Life. It's an amazing podcast. Highly recommend you guys listen to it. And they have some amazing guests, and it's just a great crew, great camaraderie. And I hope everybody has a great day. And as always, ushkabehe and cheers. Thank you, guys. Joining Matt and I, and hope you guys enjoyed this discussion about the bourbon industry and the Bourbon Life podcast. Highly recommend checking out the Bourbon Life. I'll put a link in the description. I also like to take this time to show our support for all those in Western Kentucky who tragically lost their life, and for those who lost everything in the tornadoes this past weekend. I'll be putting a link to a couple of sites to where you can donate. If you like this episode, please leave a comment and subscribe. Thank you again to my sponsors, Higher Order Smokers and Loaded Cannon Distillery. And as always, have an amazing day, and ushkabehe and cheers.